Hello, everyone. I hope you can hear me and see me okay. If not, please let me know in the chat. You can pose questions, but I hope everything is all right. Um, as you can see from Aditi's message, we will be able to see your messages and just please let us know if you can't hear us or see the presentation correctly, which I am going to share in a couple of seconds. But before I go into the content of this webinar, I want to present myself. My name is Juan, and I am a member of the product development team here at PumasAI. And I have been leading the development of the product that we are going to be talking about today, which I am sure you already know is AskPumas. So with that, I am going to go ahead and share my screen and let us get started with the session. Thank you very much for coming and welcome. Okay. So I will be starting with some slides, but I promise you I won't be just talking here for an hour. And now that we are mentioning it, I would love to have some interactions with you. So if you have any questions or any discussion points that you would like to make, I am more than happy to take them. Just write them out in the chat, and our team will inform me of those questions or comments, and we can talk about that. So please feel free to interrupt or send any questions over. But yeah, as I have already mentioned, this presentation will be about Ask Pumas, a product that some of you might already be know about. And this is more specifically about getting started. So my idea with this presentation is to just give you a overview of what Ask Pumas is and give you some details that you might have missed or that we didn't get the chance to show you during our launch event, which some of you might have attended. So um, the agenda for today is going to be somewhat simple. It is focused on these three questions that you can see on screen. The first one is what? So I will be talking to you about what AskPumas is in case you are not familiar with it. And if you are, I am going to be giving you some more details. So this will be an introduction to AskPumas. The second question that we will be tackling is why. And so this has two components. The first one is you can think of it as why should I care about Ask Pumas or why should I think about Ask Pumas? And the second one is why does Ask Pumas exist? So more specifically, this is going to be maybe comparing it with some other alternatives, which I am sure many of you already know. And the third part of this webinar is going to be focusing on the how. So how you use AskPumas. And with this, I am going to be attempting to show you how you could integrate AskPumas into your daily workflow and actually try to show you some live demo and some examples on what AskPumas can do for you. So with that, let me start. And I will be moving on to the first question that we discussed, which is what? So what is AskPumas? That might be a bit of a tricky question because that there is just so much to it. But if I had to tell you in a just single line, I would maybe say that it is an AI assistant that is focused on Pumas, Pharmacometrics, and more. And I will be expanding on what this last part and more means. But for now, let's just think about it as an AI assistant, which is a concept that I am sure many of you are familiar with. And more specifically, it is a tool that is based on a technology that for us nowadays is very familiar. And all of us know that it is also very useful, which is large language models. I am sure many of you know, but this is the technology that underlies tools like ChatGPT, for instance. And so at this point, you might say, well, what is the difference between AskPumas and ChatGPT? And that is a question that I will be tackling in the next session of this webinar. But for now, I just want to highlight some key features of AskPumas, where I believe that AskPumas takes this technology and this approach to the next level. So some of those points are here on screen. You can see them in the bullet points on the right. And they are essentially that AskPumas performs better at some of the tasks that you are interested in. So some of the work that you do with our Pumas AI products, AskPumas is specialized in that and will perform better at those tasks. And I'll explain a little bit more in some of our next slides. I also believe that AskPumas takes this to the next level by adapting to your specific needs. AskPumas is made in a very flexible and customized way, and it is really able to capture and extend itself to be able to satisfy your needs. And I will also be providing some more information on that. And the third point is that it is just available right away. It's something that we've developed and put out for you, and that it is going to be really easy to use and get started with, as we will see in the last part of this webinar, where I will be doing a live demo. Lastly, I just want to share this, which I found interesting, and it is a screenshot from our webpage. Um, if you go to pumas.ai and then you go to our products, you will see that we have this line here, which I always thought fits very well to the purpose of Ask Pumas. And it says, our products are designed to double your productivity so that you can innovate. And I think that is very much aligned with what Ask Pumas is, and you'll see why in just a second. Um, so now that we know and we have a sense of what Ask Pumas is, let me move on to the next question, which is the why. And this slide, I am just showing it to you because I have prepared some explanations and some more detailed or technical description of what AskPumas is, but this will probably be too much. However, if you are interested in knowing how AskPumas works under the hood and what are the underlying technologies, just feel free to leave a message on the chat, and I will be more than happy to come back to this slide and just explain maybe AskPumas as a retrieval augmented generation app. But the main idea that I want you to get from this slide is that AskPumas is essentially a supercharged or superpowered large language model containing a curated set of knowledge sources and some user-defined sources that are going to be provided by you. And so, yeah, there's just a lot more to say about this. This probably warrants a webinar by itself. So yeah, again, we will have some time towards the end or right now to go into more detail on this, but I will not do it just right away unless some of you want to discuss that. And so now we can move on to why, as I said. And if you remember from our first slide, when I described the agenda for today, there are two parts of this question. The first one is, why should I care about AskPumas? Or why should I think about using AskPumas? And there are two ways to answer this, or maybe two use cases, which I believe are relevant to AskPumas. The first one, which you can see on the left-hand side of the screen, is productivity enhancement. So when you think about AskPumas in this way, um, you can think of it as a trusted companion that is there to help you with anything at any time. And I have included this picture, which I think is really nice, where you can see a scientist at his desk typing something in his computer, and there's this AI, this robot assistant helping you with that. And that is the way I would like you to think about AskPumas when you're uh, using it in this productivity enhancement way. It is just someone who is right there next to you, eager to ask to answer any questions that you might have, or to just help you with anything, right? And what do I mean by anything? Some of those could be code generation. It could be helping you with your analysis. It could be helping you with debugging some code that isn't working. And we are even working on getting AskPumas to help you with your writing needs. So in that sense, AskPumas is going to be your trusted peer or companion, right? That colleague that you always ask questions to. Um, AskPumas is going to be also that. And here I want to share an experience. I was in a position where I had to learn some of Pumas AI's products not too long ago, and that is related to the second point in this why should you care about AskPumas? And you can see it on the right, which is learning. Given that AskPumas has been trained with our verified and trusted set of training materials, AskPumas is also a great tool when you want to just learn about what some of our Pumas AI products can do and how to use them. Um, and as I mentioned at the beginning, this feels a bit personal to me because I was learning some of Pumas AI's products and Julia not too long ago. And I was always trying to ask questions to my colleagues. And well, you are always afraid to maybe ask a dumb or a simple question, or of course ask a question when it's nighttime for your peer or maybe at lunchtime. And one thing that I believe is very interesting about Aspumas is that, as we mentioned just now with the analogy in the picture, Aspumas will just always be there for you. So it is really a tool that I wish had existed, and that I really excited that some other people will have now, and that people will find it much easier to learn about Pumas AI's products and just get started. And yeah, that highlights some of the points that I want to make here. Um, you can go from extremely basic to advanced questions, as we will see later on. And we have found it to be so good that we are currently trying to embed it in our support and training systems. So I am also looking forward to you interacting with Asfumas through our support system and through our learning and training processes. And there is a second part to this question. So we have now just answered, why should I care about Asfumas? And then the next part is, why does Asfumas exist? And I am sure that is a question that some of you might be asking yourselves right now, because there are just so many AI assistants and applications like this out there. Some of you might be familiar with ChatGPT, maybe with Gemini, maybe with Claude. If you are a bit more adventurous, maybe you know about Llama or some of the open source models. And so it is a very natural question to ask yourself, why ask Pumas in that sense too? And here I just want to give you three main points. And they are very related to what we just talked about at the beginning. The first one is that I think that Ask Pumas just works better. Um, we have put a lot of work and a lot of training behind Ask Pumas, and for the questions that you are interested to ask while you are using some of our Pumas AI products, Ask Pumas will perform better than those alternatives. And I wish I could do that right now, but I am not going to do it. But I hope that if you use Ask Pumas in the future, you try to ask a question to Ask Pumas and some of the other alternatives that you might be using currently. And you will notice that there is just a huge difference in both convenience and also answer quality. That brings me to the second point, which is precisely convenience. As Pumas is already focused on what you care about the most, it sort of just understands what you mean every time, and it is already doing a great job at what you want it to do a great job in. And so we have already built, designed, and maintained this system. You just have to ask your questions and try to make the most out of it. So I believe that it is a very convenient alternative compared to some of the other ones out there, which you have to put some work in a lot of cases, a lot of work to get it to work nearly as well as Pumas. And the third point is about customization and flexibility. I talked about that a little bit, and let me go back to this slide briefly. Um, Pumas is not only trained in our set of curated knowledge sources, because we understand that these tools are always better if they can adapt to your specific needs. So as you can see from this slide, users will have the ability to decide which sources they want to use for a given query. And not only that, they can also extend the base Pumas functionality with some of your user-defined data. What could that be? Maybe you want, as Pumas works great, right? But you might also work with non-mem. So you perhaps want as Pumas to be extended with non-mems documentation. Well, we have already tried that, and we are doing that internally. So if you have access to non-mems documentation, you can also try and add that, and as Pumas will be enhanced by this. But perhaps you have some paper that we don't have access to. you can also add that, and you will be effectively extending what is already there and making use of your own data inside of AskPumas. And of course, this is also very convenient, and we have developed some tools to do, which I might showcase very briefly today, but I won't be able to go into a lot of detail about that. So that brings us to the end of the why question. We have covered the two main use cases, productivity enhancement and learning, and we have also covered the three main points that I wanted to make about why AskPumas exists, right? The enhanced performance, the convenience, and also the customization part of it. And with that, we can move on to the third part of the webinar, which is how. So how can I use AskPumas? And in this part, what I want to do is to show you a hands-on example where you can maybe get a sense for what AskPumas can do and how you will be interacting with it. And so the example that I want to take on goes back to what I showed at the beginning. Um, as a scientist, you might be very clear on what your workflow is, or at least that's the part where you want to be spending most of your time and energy. And so let me go back to the first slide and refer to this phrase that I spoke about in the beginning. Our products are designed to double your productivity so that you can innovate. So we want you to focus on the last part, on innovated, on getting your workflow, on the analysis, and not so much on how, right? So this is what you already know. This is where the innovation is, and this is where you would like to spend your time. So you somehow, in a similar way to which I have laid out this presentation, you start with what, but then working your way through to how might be challenging, right? It might be difficult to write Julia code for you. It might be challenging to go through some of these errors. Or maybe you are also used to using other tools and making the transition is difficult. And so going from what to how can be a challenging task. And I would also want you to think about AskPumas as bridging that gap, as you can see here from this diagram on the bottom left corner of your screen. AskPumas will take you from what to how. Maybe not entirely there, but it will help you a lot in that process. And this is what I want to briefly showcase today. I have a very simple example here, which is meant just to give you an idea, and we won't be able to go into it in a lot of detail right now because this will be excessively long and complicated, and I can make my point with just some examples. But my goal here is to show you how you could go through a workflow like this and how AskPumas could help you uh, build it from scratch. So with that, I have ended my slides and I will be moving on to a practical example. But before, I want to pause for a minute and check if anyone has any questions, any comments you want to make. So if you have, please post them in the chat and I'll drink some water. Great. So it seems like there are no comments. That's perfect. I will now move on to the practical example. So let me share again my screen and I can go through those examples and the workflow. And if you can see my screen now, I will maybe zoom in, but let me know if you can see it. I would be happy to zoom in a little bit more. I am here on Julia Hub. If you have worked with our PumasAI products before, you might be familiar with it. If not, it is not a big deal. This is essentially just a VS Code instance, which I am sure you're all very familiar with. So this is the environment where I would be doing my PumasAI work. And as you can see, I have some folder structure here, which is very simple. Of course, in real life, you might have a much more complicated setup. But here I just have this folder called data with a CSV file. And so to get started, let me just create a Julia file called code.gl, just for the sake of this example. And well, let's try to get started. What was the first step in our workflow? Reading our data set. So we have this CSV file, and maybe you're not entirely sure about how to do it. Well, let's try just asking AskPumas to do it for us. And I am going to be switching to this tab, which contains AskPumas' interface. And as you can notice, it is a web application that is very similar to the others that you have seen before. So you will find it very easy, and you'll see that it is not a big challenge to get started with AskPumas because it's just like chatting with someone. Um, this interface also has a dark mode, but I will be staying in light mode because I think that's going to be more more easy to read, easier to read for you. And I am also not zooming in too much, but if you want, please let me know and I can make it larger. So how would we go about asking AskPumas to read this file for us? Well, we can just tell it to do it for us. So I could say something like, I have a CSV file called PK pain relief, because that's the name here, on the data folder. Give me the code to read it. Right? We're just asking Pumas to do it for us. Um, and so it will provide some explanations, and I will be going into more detail as to how these answers are structured because there is a lot going on there. But just for now, let us copy the code that it gave us with this convenience button, and let me just paste it into my coding environment, and I will run it right now. And there you go, it ran, and the results are there, right? We can see it here in the terminal that it gave us some nice code to print the first few rows of the data frame for us to inspect. But just for you to get a sense of what this data set is, it's not too important, and I will not go into a lot of detail. But it is just a simple data set with a couple of subjects, some concentration observations, our time column, and then some different doses here. So that's what we will be using for this example. Of course, it's a simple case, but it will get the message through, I believe. So, well, here you can see that we just asked for the code and it gave us to us, right? Maybe you knew how to do this, or maybe you didn't, right? If you didn't, then you have it right there. But even if you did know how to do it, I think that this is much faster, much more convenient, and in many cases, I have to admit, AskPumas writes better code than me. One example that I can highlight here is that it uses this join path function to build a robust path, right? Normally, you might, instead of doing this, you just write the path here or write the file name directly, but this is much better. And with this, I want to highlight that even if you know how to do something, this productivity enhancement part of AskPumas is something that I really think that you should explore and maybe always try to ask AskPumas something before you try to do it. Not only because of speed, but also because it might do a great job at writing code. Let me rename this data frame just so that it is not too long and our examples are kept a bit simpler. I will not be calling it PK pain relief, just df. So I need to run it again. And now that we have read our data, the next step, if you recall, is to perform some exploratory data analysis, right? And as an example here, we will be trying to visualize some PK curves. And so what I will be asking in this case is to create a concentration versus dose plot stratified by dose. And sorry, here was not dose, but time. And so once again, let's ask Pumas to do it for us. Here I am going to be deleting the conversation. And this is something that I encourage you to do, even if you're not using AskPumas, but just any LLM. If you're going to be asking a unrelated question, it is always a good idea to start fresh so that you can get the most out of the large language model. If you don't do it, it might work, but the LLM will carry a lot of unnecessary information that will not only slow it down, but also reduce the quality of your answers. So let me type again what I want AskPumas to do for me. And so in this case, I will say I have a data frame called df with columns time, column, and those, right? If you take a look once again at the columns here, you can see that those are time, concentration, and those. And what do we want to do it? Please make a concentration versus time plot. And you don't have to be this kind to ask Pumas. You can omit the please, but I always write like this, even though it's not necessary. But we not only want to do a concentration versus time plot, we want to make it stratified by those, right? And if you noticed, and let me open up again the data frame, in the dose column, we have some placebo information, and maybe we don't want to include that in our plot, right? So what I'll do here is also ask it to also remove the placebo observations from the dose column. And I'll just send that. And as you can see, answers are really fast. They are typed as they are being generated, and they take, I don't think, even a second to generate here. So let's take a look at what it did. Again, some explanations here. I will go into more detail on that later on. But let's take a look at the code. As you can see, it always gives us some code for us to just copy and paste. But in this case, it gave us, it assumes that we started from a data frame called df because that's what we told it. And it created a sample one for us. And the reason for this is that AskPumas will always try to give you complete code examples that you can just run. But of course, in this case, you should keep in mind that we already have our variable df. And so that part we have to omit. So let's copy the code from line 8 to 17. And right there. And we also need to add some additional imports that AskPumas is suggesting here. So data frames we already have. And let's add algebra, graphics, and chiromancy. And we'll also need data frames. Perfect. So let me run this import. And let's try to run the code that AskPumas gave us. As you know, plotting might take a second or two, but here is, you can see our plot here. And you might see that it is not ideal, right? The first, just as it looked, because we didn't include a lot of details here. And this is going to be actually a nice example for me to showcase what I believe is the way to work with these tools. So if I really wanted to make this correct, I don't think we need this title here because that is making it look a bit awkward. And I think I'll also add this. And so let me run it again. And there you go. That is much better. And as you can see in this example, maybe AskPumas didn't give us perfect code at the first step. And there are many different causes for this. The first one is we were only so explicit in our prompt, right? We only said that we wanted to make a concentration versus time plot stratified by those. It chose to show it in a layout, but maybe we want it in a color way. We didn't explain that to it, right? So we can just change that and create our plot. And there's also always a limitation with what an LLM can do for you. So while AskPumas is extremely helpful, and as you can see, in many cases, the code is going to be just copy, paste, and it will run perfectly. There is always going to be some manual steps that you need to do. So the way I always like to explain this is that AskPumas will take you maybe 90% of the way, right? But that 10% of the way, we still want you to do it. We still want you to be able to understand the code and really know what's going on and fit it to your own needs. But I think it's much better to go from this and then maybe do a couple of tweaks that I wanted to do than just trying to do this from scratch, especially if you might not know all of these AOG um, syntax. But at this point, you might be thinking, well, this is a bit unfair, right? Because one, you already knew that you needed to add this, or maybe you already knew that you needed to change layout for color, which wasn't necessarily a problem. We could keep it as layout. Um, but you may think, okay, but what happens if I don't know that I need to add group, or if I don't know that I need to add color, right? What do I do then? And that's where I want to go into more detail as to how AskPumas answers are built. Um, as you can see, AskPumas will always try to explain what it is doing. So let's take a quick read at the full answer. It is telling you that you need to use the algebra of graphics package. It is telling you the step by step. So what you need to do. First, you need to subset, right? And that's what it is doing. And then you need to create the plot. It is also giving you some explanation. So with this, you can maybe get a better sense as to why it did everything. So one example is here you can understand why it chose layout equals those, um, and that it will generate separate panels, right? But the part that I am most interested in showing you is this last section of the answer. So you will see that there's a list here with some bullets. In this case, it's going to be 5. And it is pointing to multiple PumasAI tutorials. And we not only have PumasAI tutorials, hopefully in the next examples, you'll see that there are some more of them. But let me open one of these links so that I can explain to you what these are. If I open the first one, for example, you'll see that I am getting to a plot customization tutorial that we have and to a section about plotting subject variability. So you can see some of the data wrangling that is very similar to what we did. You can see that here we are creating some plots that are very similar to the ones that we asked for. And of course, this is going to be a tutorial where you can dig deep into what is going on and learn about this syntax and how these plots are created, right? And the same happens if we keep going down through these links, right? So in this case, you can see that there are also some concentration versus time plots stratified by those, and so forth. So as you can also notice here, you're being taken to very relevant materials, and not only to the material itself, but just to the exact part that is relevant to what you asked. So the idea here is that you also, as you work your way through AskPumas, you're also trying to learn and understand what AskPumas is doing under the hood and how it is getting to these answers. And excuse me, I'll drink some water. Okay, so now we have read our data set and we have created our plot. Let's move on to the next part. And here I will go a bit quickly because I don't think it's worth to go into a lot of detail in this part. But just to show you what AskPumas might be capable of, the next part where you want to do what you want to explore in this workflow is to create some models, right? So let's try to ask AskPumas to generate a one compartment model for us. Again, I will delete the conversation and I'll simply say, give me the code for a one compartment model. Hopefully it will pop up on the screen very quickly. Right. Let us copy it. And maybe just for the sake of completeness here, let's ask for a 2-compartment model. Right? So I'll try to ask same question again. I will delete the conversation here instead of 1. Let's ask for a 2-compartment. So there we have our code. And again, if you want to look into what these answers are, you're more than welcome to, but I don't want to go into a lot of detail on Pumas syntax and what these models are. But you can see that it is giving us some code. And again, you're always welcome to check some of the sources, and you'll see that they are going to be pointing you to a 2-compartment model, which is what we asked for in this case. So let me delete this because we don't need it in multiple places. And for stylistic reasons, we should keep our imports at the top. So I'll move it here using Pumas. And let's run our 1-compartment model and our 2-compartment. And so maybe the next step here is we have our data set, we have our models. Maybe we want to fit those models to a population, right? And so let's fit the models, but that is a more complicated question, right? I am not so sure about how to fit a model. I am not very clear on how to even ask Pumas to do that for me, right? I cannot just say fit this model for me. That's just not going to work. So in this case, I want to showcase the second part of why you should be interested in AskPumas. So what we've gone over so far, and let me go back to the slides on why, is the productivity enhancement side of things. So as you can see, we know what we want to do. We are very clear on that. And we're just asking AskPumas to do it for us. And it is doing a fantastic job at that, right? With very minimal tweaks. And maybe in a matter of 15 minutes, we got more than 100 lines of code, of good code that is running. And this is because I am even showcasing to you. You can imagine that this is going to be an even faster process if you're doing this on your own and are very clear on what you want to do. And that's very good. But there is this other side about learning. And that is what I want to showcase with this slightly more complicated question of how do I fit a model in Pumas? And so I'm not even sure how to start here. So why don't I ask Pumas to do it for me, right? So how do I fit a model in Pumas? I can ask this very general open question that is a bit more conceptual. It's not going to be as clear cut or give me code for this as the others. And as you can see, the answer was also very different, right? It is now trying to teach you rather than give you code. And so in this case, it is going to highlight some of the steps that are required to fit a model in Pumas. It is telling you first that you need to use the fit function. Of course, you need to define your model, which luckily we already did. We know how to do that. So maybe let's go to the second step. It is telling us that we need to prepare our data by creating a population or a subject. And I'll go into more detail on that in a second. It is also telling us that we need to set our initial parameters. And as you can see, for each step, it is giving us an example on how to do it. It is always telling us that we need to choose our algorithm, and then we finally fit the model using the fit function, right? Also, it is suggesting us a bit on how to analyze the results. And here, again, I want to show you that we have different sources. So in this case, we are also being pointed to our Pumas documentation. So maybe you read this and this is fine for you, but perhaps you also want to take a deeper look and learn more about some of these concepts. So just click on the first link and you can go to our great documentation. Again, not to just the documentation, but to the part that is relevant to you, right? To conducting to the introduction to Pumas, and then the conducting an estimation section, which, as you can see, goes over the whole process of fitting a model, right? And if you have ever had the chance to read our documentation, I really recommend it. It is very detailed and very interesting to read. But this is what is nice about AskPumas, right? It would not only give you the answer, but it would also point you in the right direction, right? And here you can see an example also of a paper that we have. So there's lots of things to do here. So looking at this answer, it seems like what we need is to prepare our data, right? We need to define a population. And the way this is done here, it is not quite what we have, right? Because what we have is this data frame. So now that we know how to do it, let's maybe do another one of these learning or more general questions. And in this case, let's ask, how do I, sorry, we can ask something rather like, I have a data frame called df. How do I create a population from it? So the first question helped us narrow down our problem, and now we are being taken to the, now we're asking a more specific one about creating the population. And in this case, it is telling us that we need to use the read Pumas function. And also giving us some examples. So here it created this toy data frame, and it is also telling us the syntax on how to use read Pumas. So maybe we can copy the code here, and let's try to run it and see what happens. And we get an error, right? As you expected, maybe this question was very general, and so there is really no reason for this to work, right? Um, you can see that our errors are quite informative, or we try that most of the time, and it is telling us that it has no doses, and that the keys are incorrect, right? So you might want to go, okay, yeah, ID in this case is not ID, rather it is subject, right? Now we have time. Our observations are actually this. Amount is going to be those, and I don't have this column, so I'll comment them out. And again, we run into an error, right? Because it doesn't have an EVID column. And in this case, you might be a little bit stuck. So what do? Then you go again and ask a question, right? So what are the EVID? And the other column that we have is CNT. Required for a relation. And you can see that it is giving us a very detailed explanation on what each of these columns are, and it is even giving us some suggestions on how to transform our data set to include those columns, right? So you can see that EVID is going to signify the event type, so 0 for an observation, 1 for a dose event, and so forth. And there is also the CMT column, which is the compartment that where the dose is being applied. So with this information, we could go on and take this code and perform the data wrangling. But I think that by now, you're getting the idea that AskPumas can help you with these two use cases, right? So the first one, productivity enhancement. The second one, also sort of taking you by your hand and helping you learn these more general concepts of Pumas AI products, right? And really, I think in this brief 10 minutes, we have learned just so much by asking 3 questions and looking at a couple links, which I have always found very interesting when I am looking at Ask Pumas. And as you saw, there are many more steps to this workflow, right? We can try to fix those issues with the information that AskPumas gave us, fit the models. Perhaps then we want to perform some comparison to see which model is better through, let's say, the highest log likelihood. we can do maybe some covariate selection, and then we might want to visualize those results through a forest plot. And AskPumas can help you with that because all of that is contained in our training materials. But of course, as you might imagine, this will be too long and too complicated for the purpose of this webinar, and it's already been 45 minutes. So my thinking is to stop here. I think you already saw the capabilities of AskPumas and what it can do for you. And I hope that you can find it interesting. I see that there are some questions regarding access to AskPumas. We will get back to you on that question. But if you have any other questions regarding the content of the webinar, the examples that I just showed, I would be happy to discuss. So I'm going to pause here for a second in case you want to type any questions, and I can get back to you. Great. So it seems like there aren't any questions. Yeah, it seems like there aren't any questions apart from what was already there and Aditi told you. So please go ahead and contact our business development team at sales@pumas.ai. I believe we also have a form if you go to our webpage that you can fill out to show your interest in AskPumas. So we are very happy to hear back from you to maybe showcase this a lot more and hear what you're interested in. But for now, I will say thank you for attending the webinar. It has been great to showcase what AskPumas can do for you. Um, Also great to see you here, and I hope to see you again in the future and that you are able to try out AskPumas and enjoy it as much as we have. Thank you very much for being here. I'll say goodbye.